Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Derek Sullivan worked as a surveyor for the Tennessee Department of Natural Resources, documenting abandoned mine sites across the eastern part of the state. Coal mining had been a major industry in the region for over a century, leaving behind thousands of tunnels, shafts, and excavations. Most had been sealed decades ago, but periodic checks were necessary to ensure the seals remained intact and no environmental hazards had developed. In September 2019, Derek's assignment took him to a mine site near Briceville, a town that had once been a coal mining hub, but now consisted of a few hundred residents and not much else. The mine, designated as Harrowing Deep No. 7, had been sealed in 1938 after a collapse killed 14 miners. The official records indicated that the mine entrance had been filled with concrete, the tunnels deemed too dangerous and economically unviable to recover. Derek parked his DNR truck at the coordinates provided in his assignment paperwork. The area was heavily forested, the mine entrance supposedly somewhere in the dense trees. He grabbed his equipment, surveying tools, GPS unit, camera, safety gear, and started hiking. The concrete seal was exactly where the records said it would be, a massive plug filling what had once been the mine's main entrance. The concrete showed its age, cracked and weathered, but appeared structurally sound. Derek photographed it from multiple angles, took measurements, made notes on his tablet. That's when he heard the sound. It came from inside the mine. Through tons of concrete and decades of sedimentation, a sound reached Derek's ears. Not an animal noise, not wind or water. This was mechanical, rhythmic, like machinery operating deep underground. The sound of something running, working, functioning behind the sealed entrance. Derek pressed his ear against the concrete. The sound was clearer, more defined. It was definitely machinery, heavy equipment maybe, or some kind of ventilation system. But that made no sense. The mine had been abandoned for 81 years. Nothing should be running down there. He checked his paperwork. No mention of any equipment left in the mine. No notes about automated systems that might still be operating. The mine had been sealed, end of story. But Derek could hear something, unmistakably hear it. The rhythm was regular, consistent, the sound of a machine performing a task, repeating a cycle, never stopping. Derek took audio recordings on his phone, capturing the sound. He made detailed notes, documenting the time, the location, the characteristics of what he was hearing. This would go in his report. Someone at the DNR would know what this was, would have an explanation. He continued his survey, checking the area around the seal, looking for cracks or openings where gas might be escaping. That was always a concern with old mines, methane buildup seeking release, but he found nothing unusual. No gas detectors registered anything. The seal appeared intact. Derek was about to leave when he noticed something off to his left, partially hidden by brush. Another opening, a smaller entrance, maybe a ventilation shaft or auxiliary tunnel. This one wasn't sealed. The opening was dark and uninviting, about 4 feet high, leading down into the earth at a steep angle. According to his maps, there shouldn't be another entrance here. Harrowing Deep No. 7 had one main entrance, which was sealed. No other openings were documented. But here it was, unmapped and open, leading into the same mine system. Derek played his flashlight beam into the darkness. The tunnel descended sharply, shored up with old timber supports that looked decades old, but somehow intact. And from this opening, the mechanical sound was louder, clearer, echoing up from the depths. Derek made a decision that he'd regret for the rest of his life. He should have marked the opening, reported it, and left. That was protocol. Don't enter unstable mines. Don't take risks. Document and report. But Derek was curious, and the tunnel looked stable, and he wanted to understand what he was hearing, wanted to solve the mystery before reporting it. He entered the tunnel, his flashlight cutting through darkness that seemed thicker than normal, more resistant to light. The tunnel descended at a 30-degree angle, the floor worn smooth by years of use. The timber supports looked old but solid. No signs of recent collapse. The mechanical sound grew louder as Derek descended. After 50 yards, the tunnel leveled out and opened into a larger space. Derek emerged into a chamber that took his breath away. It was a working mine. Not abandoned, not sealed, active. Equipment stood throughout the chamber, drills and conveyor systems and sorting tables, all arranged as if miners had just left for a lunch break. Electric lights hung from the ceiling. Not functioning, but present, wired and ready. Tools lay on benches, organized and maintained. But dust covered everything. Thick dust, undisturbed, indicating nothing had been touched in years, probably decades. The mine was active but frozen, caught in the moment of abandonment, preserved like a museum exhibit. And the mechanical sound was coming from deeper in, from tunnels that branched off from this central chamber, leading further into the mountain. Derek walked through the chamber, his flashlight revealing more details. A chalkboard on one wall showed production numbers, dated March 7, 1938. A clipboard hung on a nail, work assignments written in fading ink. Lunch pails sat on a table, their contents long since turned to dust. This was the mine as it had been the day of the collapse. The day 14 men had died, and the entrance was sealed. Everything preserved, frozen in time, waiting for miners who would never return. But something was still running. Deep in the tunnels, machinery operated, powered by sources that shouldn't exist, performing tasks that had no purpose. Derek knew he should leave. Every instinct screamed at him to get out, report this, bring in experts and equipment. But the sound pulled at him, demanded understanding. He needed to know what was running, why it was running, how it had survived 81 years without maintenance or power. He chose a tunnel, the one where the sound seemed loudest, and descended further. The tunnel was narrower here, the ceiling lower, forcing Derek to stoop. The air grew colder as he walked, his breath misting, temperature dropping despite the depth. After what felt like 10 minutes but was probably longer, Derek's flashlight found something ahead. A machine, large and industrial, sitting in the middle of the tunnel. It was a pump of some kind, or maybe a ventilation fan, hard to tell in the limited light. And it was running, spinning, operating, even though no power lines connected to it. No fuel fed it, no apparent energy source explained its function. Derek approached carefully. The machine was old, probably original to the mine, but it ran smoothly, its rhythm perfect, its motion perpetual. He reached out to touch it, to confirm it was real. The moment his fingers made contact, the machine stopped. The silence was deafening. That mechanical sound, which had been constant since Derek entered the mine, cut off completely. The machine stood motionless, no longer running, as if Derek's touch had broken whatever force animated it. And in the silence, Derek heard something else. Voices, distant, echoing, coming from deeper in the tunnels. Men's voices, calling to each other. The words unintelligible, but the tone clear. Workers communicating, coordinating, doing the tasks of mining. Derek's blood ran cold. There shouldn't be anyone down here. The mine was sealed, abandoned, officially closed. But he could hear people, multiple voices, coming from the depths. He turned and ran. Pure panic, no thought, just the animal need to escape. Derek sprinted back through the tunnel, through the preserved chamber, up the sloping entrance tunnel. Behind him, the voices grew louder, closer, as if whatever he'd awakened was pursuing him, flowing up through the tunnels, chasing the living person who'd intruded on their eternal work. Derek burst out of the auxiliary entrance, into daylight and fresh air and reality. He didn't stop running until he reached his truck. Didn't feel safe until he'd started the engine and driven a miles down the road. He sat in a gas station parking lot, hands shaking, trying to rationalize what he'd experienced. A hallucination, gas exposure, panic attack brought on by claustrophobia. There had to be an explanation that didn't involve impossible machines and ghost miners. But Derek's phone had recorded audio during his time in the mine. He played it back, listening to his footsteps, his breathing, and underneath it all, that mechanical sound, clear and undeniable. And at the end of the recording, after the machine stopped, the voices were there too, faint but present, men calling to each other in the darkness. Derek reported his findings to his supervisor at the DNR, described the unsealed auxiliary entrance, the preserved chamber, the mechanical sounds. Isaac Porter was a photographer documenting abandoned buildings across Appalachia for a coffee table book he hoped to publish in 2022. He'd spent 18 months traveling through Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Virginia, capturing the decay of rural America, forgotten factories, collapsed houses, schools where children's drawings still hung on classroom walls. Each location told a story of economic decline, population exodus, the slow death of mountain communities. In August 2021, Isaac's research led him to a church outside Coalfield, Tennessee. The Church of Bright Morning, according to local historical records, built in 1889 and abandoned in 1967. The congregation had dwindled over decades until only 3 members remained, and when the last of them died, the church had been locked and left to time. Isaac found the church at the end of a dirt road that barely qualified as drivable. His SUV bounced over ruts and rocks, tree branches scraping the sides. The road wound through dense forest, climbing steadily until it emerged into a clearing. The church stood there, white clapboard glowing in the afternoon sun. It looked impossibly pristine for a building that had been abandoned for over 50 years. No broken windows, no sagging roof. The paint, while faded, showed no signs of peeling or rot. The bell tower rose straight and true, its bell visible through the open arches at the top. Isaac parked and sat for a moment, studying the building. Something felt off. The clearing around the church was unnaturally uniform, grass cut short despite having no reason to be maintained. No vines climbed the walls. No saplings sprouted near the foundation. The forest had stopped at the edge of the clearing, as if respecting some boundary, some rule that said this space was off-limits to natural reclamation. He grabbed his camera bag and approached the front door. It was unlocked, the handle turning smoothly under his hand. The hinges didn't squeak. Inside, the church smelled of old wood and something else. Something Isaac couldn't identify. Not decay, not must. Something cleaner, almost antiseptic. The interior was perfect. Rows of pews, all intact, all straight. Hymnals in the racks, pages yellowed but readable. A pulpit at the front, a cross on the wall behind it. Windows on both sides, clear glass letting in sunlight that illuminated every corner. But no dust. That's what caught Isaac's attention first. No dust anywhere. No cobwebs. No signs of animals nesting or insects boring through wood. The church was as clean as if someone had swept it that morning. Isaac started photographing. His camera captured the pews, the pulpit, the way light fell through the windows. He was framing a shot of the altar when he noticed his watch. 12 p.m. He'd arrived around 2:30 p.m. He was certain of it. Had spent maybe 10 minutes driving up the dirt road. Another 5 studying the church from outside, a few minutes inside. It should have been close to 3 p.m., but his watch showed noon exactly. Isaac checked his phone. 12:00 p.m. The timestamp on his photos showed 12:00 p.m. Every clock and device he had agreed. It was noon. But that was impossible. He'd driven here in afternoon light, had watched the sun descending from its apex. It had been definitely past noon when he arrived. Isaac walked to one of the windows and looked out. The sun hung directly overhead, at its zenith, casting almost no shadows. Noonlight, unmistakable. The clearing outside looked washed out in the flat illumination of midday. He turned back to the church interior and continued photographing, telling himself there was a rational explanation. His watch battery was dying. His phone had glitched. He'd misremembered the time he'd left his hotel that morning. But 30 minutes later, when Isaac checked his watch again, it still showed 12:00 p.m. Exactly 12, not 12:01 or 12:30. As if time had stopped, frozen at noon, refusing to advance. Isaac walked back outside. The sun hadn't moved. Still directly overhead. Still noon, impossibly still noon. He got in his SUV and checked the dashboard clock. 12:00 p.m. He turned on the radio, found a station, and listened to the DJ announce the time between songs. Coming up on noon here on 94.5, WKXZ. It was stuck. Time was stuck. Or he was stuck, frozen in the single minute of noon, while somewhere else, in the real world, time continued normally. Isaac drove away from the church, back down the dirt road, watching his dashboard clock. It remained at 12:00 p.m. The sun stayed overhead, following him, maintaining its zenith position despite Isaac driving in a direction that should have changed the angle. He reached the highway, the real paved road where he'd turned off to find the church. The clock in his SUV flickered, jumped, and showed 3:17 p.m. Normal time resumed. Isaac looked back, but the dirt road was gone. Where the turnoff should have been, there was only unbroken forest. Trees growing so close together that no road could possibly pass through. Isaac pulled over, his heart racing. He grabbed his phone and checked his photos. All of them were there, time-stamped 12:00 p.m. The church, the pews, the perfect interior. Proof that he'd been there, that it was real. He tried to find the road again, driving slowly along the highway, looking for any break in the trees. Nothing. He drove 5 miles in each direction, searching. The dirt road had vanished, or had never existed, or existed only at a specific time, in a specific moment. Isaac returned to Caulfield and visited the public library. The historical records confirmed the Church of Bright Morning's existence. There were photos from the 1950s showing the building exactly as Isaac had found it. According to an archived newspaper article from 1967, the church had been locked after Reverend Thomas Marsh's death, the last member of the congregation. The article mentioned something strange. Marsh had died at noon, collapsed behind the pulpit mid-service despite being the only person present. His watch stopped at exactly 12:00 p.m. Isaac found more references. A Historical Society newsletter from 1982 mentioned that hikers occasionally reported finding the church, always describing it as unnaturally preserved, always experiencing time discrepancies while inside. One hiker claimed to have spent 15 minutes in the church, only to discover 6 hours had passed in the outside world. Another said they'd been inside for 3 hours, but emerged to find only minutes had elapsed. And all of them mentioned the sun. How it was always noon in the clearing. How time refused to move forward past that single suspended moment. Isaac became obsessed. He researched temporal anomalies, quantum mechanics, the physics of time dilation. He contacted physicists, parapsychologists, anyone who might explain what he'd experienced. Most dismissed him. A few were intrigued enough to ask for coordinates, but Isaac couldn't provide coordinates. He didn't know where the church was. The GPS in his SUV showed no data for the time he'd spent on the dirt road, no breadcrumb trail he could follow back. The location existed outside of mappable space, or in some pocket that only opened occasionally. He tried to find it again. Drove Highway 52 outside Coalfield for weeks, checking every possible turn-off, every dirt road, every break in the forest. The church didn't appear. Isaac began to think he'd imagined it, that his photographs were the only proof of an experience that might have been hallucination or dream. Then he got a message on his photography website, an email from someone named Marcus Sutherland, claiming she'd seen his church photos on social media. The email read, "I know that church. My grandmother was one of the last members of the congregation. She told me stories about Reverend Marsh and what happened there. If you want to understand what you experienced, meet me at the Coalfield Diner tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'll explain what the church really is." Isaac drove to Coalfield the next day. Margaret Sutherland was a woman in her 70s, sharp-eyed and direct. She ordered coffee, waited for Isaac to sit, then said, "My grandmother attended the Church of Bright Morning from 1947 until it closed. She was there when Reverend Marsh performed the ritual." "What ritual?" "Marsh was obsessed with permanence, with creating something that wouldn't decay, wouldn't die, wouldn't be touched by time. He studied old traditions, folk magic from the Scottish immigrants who'd settled these mountains. He believed if he could stop time in one location, fix it at a single perfect moment, he could create a sanctuary from death and decay." Margaret pulled out a faded photograph. It showed a group of people standing outside the church, maybe 20 congregation members. A man in preacher's robe stood at the center, tall and severe-looking. "That's Marsh," Margaret said. "He chose noon as his eternal moment, the high point of the sun, the middle of the day, when shadows were shortest and light was strongest. He believed noon was the most powerful time, the moment furthest from midnight and darkness." "He succeeded," Isaac said. "Time doesn't move in that church. It's permanently noon." He succeeded too well. The ritual worked, but it trapped him. Marsh was inside the church when he completed the spell, when he fixed noon in place. He couldn't leave. Time was frozen for him, but his body wasn't suspended. He still aged, still needed food and water. The congregation found him 3 days later, dead from dehydration, his body showing signs of weeks of deprivation despite only 3 days passing in the outside world. Isaac felt cold spreading through his chest. The different rates of time. Inside the church, weeks can pass while minutes go by outside. Or the other way around. Time is broken there, unpredictable. "My grandmother said Marsh's ghost is still inside, trapped in the eternal noon he created, unable to die because death requires time to pass. He exists in that single frozen moment, conscious and aware, experiencing noon forever." "I didn't see anyone in the church." Margaret's smile was sad. "You saw it at a stable moment, when the broken time aligned with the outside world. But if you'd stayed longer, if you'd been inside when the alignment shifted, you might have seen him, might have felt what he feels, eternity compressed into a single minute, every second stretched to infinity. It's not peace, Mr. Porter, it's torture." Isaac thought about the church's perfect preservation. No decay, no dust. Frozen at one moment, unable to progress forward into degradation. Why does the road appear and disappear? Aye, the church exists in a bubble of stopped time. Sometimes the bubble touches our reality, creates a connection, and the road appears. But it's not stable. The connection comes and goes. People find the church, experience its frozen noon, and leave. Some of them come back changed. Some of them don't come back at all. What happens to them? Margaret didn't answer directly. Instead, she pulled out another photograph, newer, from the 1990s. It showed the church clearing, and in the photo, barely visible in one of the windows, was a face. Then another photo from 2005. and Isaac counted 4 faces in various windows. A third photo from 2018 showed at least 10. People who stay too long, Margaret said, who get trapped when the connection closes while they're still inside. Time breaks for them. They become like marsh, frozen in eternal noon, unable to leave, unable to die. Just existing in that single moment forever, watching the world through windows that only sometimes open to normal time. Isaac stared at the photos. In his mind, he saw himself staying in the church, photographing for hours, losing track of time. Then trying to leave and finding the door wouldn't open, the road had vanished. Time had frozen around him while noon stretched on forever. "Why tell me this?" Isaac asked. "Why warn me?" "Because you went inside and came out. That's rare. Most people who find the church either never enter, scared off by the wrongness of it, or they go in and don't leave. You're one of the few who've experienced it and escaped." She paused. "My grandmother made me promise to watch for people who found the church, to warn them not to go back. It calls to people, you see. The frozen time is seductive, the idea of a moment that never ends, a noon that never advances to evening. Some people want that, want to escape the progression of time." "I don't want that," Isaac said firmly. "Maybe not now, but you'll think about it. You'll remember how quiet it was in there, how perfect, how safe, and part of you will want to return to experience that frozen moment again. That's how Marsh gets you. That's how he adds to his congregation." Isaac left Coalfield that day and tried to forget the church. He finished his photography project, published his book in 2022. None of the church photos made it into the final version. He couldn't explain them, couldn't risk questions about the impossible building. But Margaret was right. Isaac thought about the church constantly, dreamed about it. In his dreams, he'd be back in the clearing, back inside the perfect interior, and noon would be lasting forever, and he wouldn't mind. The dream version of himself was content to exist in that single, stretched moment, free from the demands of progressing time. In January 2023, Isaac drove back to Coalfield. He told himself it was for closure, to prove the church was gone, to convince himself it had been a one-time experience. He drove Highway 52, watching for the dirt road. He found it at 11:57 a.m. The turnoff appeared, exactly as he remembered it. Isaac turned onto the dirt road, his heart pounding. The church appeared after a mile of rough driving, white clapboard glowing in mid-morning sun. Isaac checked his watch as he approached. 11:59 a.m. He parked, walked to the door, his hand on the handle. Inside, he knew it would be noon. Eternal, frozen noon. He could go in, experience that stopped moment again, gather more photographs, more evidence, or he could drive away, leave the church to its impossible existence, let noon continue forever without him. Isaac opened the door. The interior was as he remembered. Perfect, preserved. And on the pews, sitting quietly, were people. 10 of them, maybe 12, scattered throughout the church, all sitting motionless, facing forward, their expressions peaceful. They turned to look at him in unison. Their faces showed no surprise, no emotion at all, just empty recognition, as if they'd been expecting him. Isaac checked his watch. 12 p.m. He'd crossed the threshold. He was inside the frozen moment. One of the people in the pews spoke, a woman in clothes from decades ago. "Welcome to the service. Reverend Marsh will be pleased. We've been waiting for you." Isaac turned to run, but the door was closed. He didn't remember closing it, and when he grabbed the handle, it wouldn't turn. Locked, sealed, trapping him inside with the frozen congregation and their eternal noon. "Don't worry," the woman said. "You'll adjust. Time won't pass for you anymore. No aging, no death, just this moment, forever. It's peaceful once you accept it." Isaac yanked on the door, panic overriding thought. It wouldn't budge. He ran to a window, tried to open it, sealed shut. He grabbed a hymnal, ready to throw it through the glass, but his arm wouldn't complete the motion. Time stuttered, froze, caught him mid-throw. When time resumed a heartbeat later, Isaac was sitting in a pew. He didn't remember sitting down. The hymnal was back in its rack. His camera bag sat beside him, organized, his equipment arranged neatly. At the pulpit, a figure stood. Tall, wearing preacher's robes, the face severe and lined with age that had been frozen mid-progression. Reverend Marsh, dead since 1967 but unable to die, trapped in the eternal noon he'd created. Marsh spoke, his voice echoing through the perfect acoustics of the church. "Let us give thanks for this moment, for this noon that never ends, for the blessing of permanence in a world of decay." The congregation responded in unison, "We give thanks." Isaac tried to stand. Couldn't. His body wouldn't respond. Time had him now, locked in place, frozen at noon just like everyone else. Marsh smiled. "We have a new member. Welcome, Brother Isaac. Welcome to the Church of Perpetual Noon. We've been waiting for you to come home." Isaac wanted to scream, but his voice wouldn't work. Time had frozen that too, locked his throat mid-breath. He could only sit and watch as Marsh began the sermon. The same sermon he'd probably been delivering for 56 years, the same words repeated in the same eternal moment. Outside the windows, the sun hung motionless at its zenith. Noon continuing, unchanging, forever. Isaac Porter was last seen in Coalfield, Tennessee in January 2023. His SUV was found on Highway 52, engine running, doors locked. His camera equipment was missing. The local police investigated briefly, found no signs of foul play, eventually listed him as a missing person. But Margaret Sutherland knew what had happened. She added another photograph to her collection. This one taken in February 2023 by a hiker who'd stumbled upon the church. In one of the windows, barely visible, a new face appeared among the congregation. A face holding a camera, forever framing a shot that would never be taken, in a moment that would never end. At noon, always noon. Daniel Kovacs bought the house in Wheelers Ridge, Tennessee, for $37,000 at a county auction in April 2020. The place had been abandoned for 6 years, the previous owner dying without heirs, the property reverting to the county for unpaid taxes. It needed work, sure, but Daniel was a contractor with time on his hands thanks to pandemic shutdowns. He could fix it up, maybe flip it for a profit, or keep it as a rental property. The house was a modest 2-story built in 1952, sitting on 3 acres of mountain land at the end of a gravel road. Standard construction for the era. Concrete foundation, wood frame, asbestos siding that would need to be professionally removed. Daniel did a walkthrough before the auction, checked the structure, looked for major issues. The place was sound. Roof needed work. Plumbing needed updating. Electrical was ancient but functional. Nothing he couldn't handle. He didn't go into the basement. The door was locked, and the auctioneer didn't have a key. "Old furnace down there. Maybe some storage," the man said with a shrug. "Nothing important. You can crowbar it open after you take possession." Daniel should have insisted on seeing the basement before he bid. Should have wondered why the door was locked, why no one had opened it during the years the property sat empty. Should have paid attention to the scratches around the lock, marks that looked like someone had clawed at the door from the inside. He moved in on a Saturday, his truck loaded with tools and the bare necessities for living in a house without furniture. The basement door was the first thing he tackled. The lock was old, a heavy deadbolt that looked original to the house. Daniel tried picking it, failed, and finally used a drill to destroy the mechanism. The door swung open on hinges that shrieked like something dying. Stairs descended into darkness that his flashlight couldn't quite penetrate, shadow so thick it seemed solid. The air that rushed up was cold and stale and wrong, carrying a smell Daniel couldn't identify, something organic and sharp. The basement was larger than it should have been. Daniel knew the dimensions of the house, had measured the foundation during his inspection. The basement should have been maybe 30 by 40 feet, matching the footprint of the first floor. But when he descended the stairs and swept his flashlight around, he saw space extending far beyond what was possible. The concrete floor stretched away into darkness, farther than his light could reach. Support pillars marked intervals, marching away into the distance, holding up a ceiling that should have been the first floor but felt somehow higher, more cavernous. Daniel walked 20 paces into the basement, then 30, then 50. He should have reached the far wall, should have found the boundary of the foundation. The wall never appeared. The basement just kept going, extending impossibly under earth that should have been solid, space that should not exist. Daniel stopped, his heart rate climbing. This wasn't possible. Basements didn't extend beyond their houses. Space didn't fold in on itself to create areas larger than their containers. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the previous owner had dug an expansion, created a storage area that extended beyond the original foundation. Unusual, but not impossible. But as Daniel stood in the impossible basement, his flashlight revealing nothing but empty concrete and distant pillars, he realized this wasn't an expansion. This was something else. Something wrong. He turned back toward the stairs, his light finding them easily. They were right there, 20 yards away, leading up to the normal world, to his house, to reality. Relief flooded through him. He wasn't lost. He could leave. But first, he needed to understand what he was dealing with. Daniel was a contractor, a practical man who solved problems through work and careful analysis. An impossible basement was just another problem to solve. He walked along one wall, trailing his hand against the concrete, feeling the cold solidity of it. Every 20 feet, he made a mark with a piece of chalk, keeping track of his progress. He walked for 10 minutes, marking walls, and never found a corner. The wall just kept going, extending straight into darkness, no angles, no boundaries. Daniel stopped at his 20th chalk mark. 200 feet of straight wall. The house was 30 feet wide. This basement was extending under the neighboring property, under the road, under the entire mountain. That, or space itself, was breaking down, stretching, creating volume that shouldn't exist. He walked back to the stairs, counting his chalk marks, confirming he was retracing his steps correctly. All 20 marks were there. He reached the stairs exactly where he expected them to be. So the space wasn't shifting or changing. It was stable, just wrong. Daniel went upstairs, closed the basement door, and sat in his empty living room trying to rationalize what he'd seen. Old houses had quirks. Mountains did strange things to foundations and drainage. Maybe there was a natural cave system under the property that had been incorporated into the basement. Maybe the previous owner had been a conspiracy theorist who'd built a massive underground shelter. Maybe. But Daniel didn't believe it. The basement felt purposeful, deliberate, like something that wanted to be infinite, that had chosen to extend beyond normal limits. He spent the rest of the day working on the house, replacing window screens, fixing a door that wouldn't latch, anything to avoid thinking about the basement. But as darkness fell and the house settled into night sounds, Daniel couldn't ignore it any longer. The basement door was open. He'd closed it, locked it even, using a simple slide bolt he'd installed. But now it stood wide open, that shrieking hinges sound echoing through the empty house, darkness spilling up from below. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and approached carefully. The stairs descended into shadow. He shone his light down and froze. There was something at the bottom of the stairs, a shape, human-sized, standing motionless in the darkness just beyond where his light could fully penetrate. Daniel's throat went dry. He hadn't seen anything like that when he'd explored earlier. The basement had been empty. "Hello?" His voice sounded small. "Someone there?" The shape didn't move, didn't respond. Just stood there, a silhouette against deeper darkness, waiting. Daniel's hand found his phone. He turned on the phone's flashlight, adding it to his main flashlight, doubling the illumination. The combined light pushed back the shadow, revealing the figure more clearly. It was a person, or had been. The shape stood on the basement floor, wearing clothes Daniel couldn't quite parse. The style wrong somehow, too old or too formal. But the details didn't matter because Daniel's eyes locked onto the figure's face. It had no features. Smooth skin where eyes and nose and mouth should be, like an unfinished sculpture, like someone had erased a person's identity and left only the suggestion of humanity. Daniel stumbled backward, his lights wavering. The figure moved, not walking, but gliding, flowing up the stairs with a motion that bypassed the need for steps. It ascended smoothly, silently, that blank face turning toward Daniel, regarding him with senses that shouldn't exist. Daniel ran. Pure instinct, no thought, just the animal brain screaming at him to flee. He made it to the front door, yanked it open, and stopped. Outside, where his driveway and the gravel road should have been, there was only more basement. Concrete floor, support pillars, darkness extending infinitely. The outside world had been replaced by the basement, or the basement had expanded to consume everything, swallowing reality and replacing it with emptiness. Daniel turned. The faceless figure stood in his living room, 20 feet away, motionless again. Waiting. "What do you want?" Daniel's voice cracked. "What are you?" The figure raised one arm and pointed. The gesture somehow awful, a motion that carried weight beyond the physical. It pointed past Daniel, toward the door that now opened into impossible space. Daniel understood. The message was clear. The basement wanted him, had always wanted him. That's why the house had been so cheap, why it had been abandoned, why the basement door had been locked. The previous owner had known, had tried to seal it away. Had failed, probably, had been taken just like Daniel was about to be taken, but Daniel wasn't going, wouldn't go. He was alive, real, solid, This thing, this faceless horror, couldn't make him walk into that darkness. The figure took a step forward, then another, moving slowly, deliberately, backing Daniel toward the door, toward the basement that had consumed the world beyond his house. Daniel looked around desperately for a weapon, a tool, anything. His eyes landed on the slide bolt he'd installed on the basement door. A bolt, iron, cold iron. Wasn't there folklore about iron protecting against supernatural things? Daniel's grandfather had been from the old country, had told stories about spirits and the ways to ward them off. Maybe it was insane. Maybe it was grasping at straws. But Daniel dove for the basement door, grabbed the bolt, yanked it free from the wood. 8 inches of solid iron, heavy and real in his hand. The faceless figure stopped, tilted its head. That blank face somehow conveying surprise, confusion. Daniel held the bolt like a knife, pointing it at the figure. "I don't know what you are, but you can't have me. This is my house, my property. You don't belong here." The figure moved fast, faster than should be possible, closing the distance in a blur, but Daniel was already swinging, the iron bolt cutting through air, through space, through the figure itself. The bolt connected with where the figure's shoulder should be. The impact felt like hitting water, resistance but not solidity, form but not substance. The figure made a sound, a cry that came from everywhere and nowhere, a voice without a mouth screaming in frequencies that made Daniel's teeth ache. And then it was gone. Not destroyed, not defeated, just absent, pulled back into the basement, retreating into its impossible depths. The front door slammed shut. When Daniel looked, he saw normal night beyond the windows, his driveway, the gravel road, the real world restored. The basement had released its grip, retreated into boundaries it should never have left. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in his living room with every light on, the iron bolt clutched in his hand, listening to the sounds of the house. Around 3 a.m. he heard the basement door creak open again, heard footsteps on the stairs, slow and measured. Heard them reach the top of the stairs and stop. But nothing emerged. Whatever lived in the basement had learned caution. It waited at the threshold, testing, seeing if Daniel would react, if he would come to investigate. Daniel stayed in his chair, iron bolt ready, and waited for morning. When the sun rose, Daniel went to the basement door. It was open, darkness beyond, but the stairs were empty. He descended slowly, iron bolt in hand, flashlight in the other. The basement was normal-sized, 30 by 40 feet, concrete floor and walls, the furnace in one corner, some old storage shelves in another. A standard basement matching the house's foundation exactly. The impossible extensions were gone, pulled back, hidden, waiting. Daniel found marks on the wall near the stairs. Scratches, deep gouges in the concrete, arranged in patterns that might have been words in some language Daniel didn't recognize. Or maybe they were just scratches, random marks that looked like meaning only because human brains insisted on finding patterns. Near the marks, Daniel found something else. A photograph, old and water-stained, showing a man standing in front of the house. The photo was dated 1976 on the back, along with a name, Robert Henshaw. The previous owner, probably, or one of them. The man in the photo looked tired, frightened, like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. On the back of the photo, beneath the name and date, someone had written a message in shaky handwriting. It gets bigger when you're not looking. Don't let it know you're afraid. Iron helps. Fire doesn't. God doesn't answer prayers from this place. Daniel pocketed the photo and went upstairs. He spent that day researching the property's history, digging through county records, old newspaper archives, anything that might explain the basement. He found 3 previous owners before Robert Henshaw. 2 had died in the house, causes of death listed as heart failure and suicide respectively. The 3rd had simply disappeared, the property eventually declared abandoned when no one came forward to claim it. Every owner had made changes to the basement door, reinforced it, changed the locks, added bolts, as if each one had tried to seal off the basement, to keep something in or keep something out, and each one had failed. Daniel lived in that house for 6 months. 6 months of waking up to find the basement door open. 6 months of hearing footsteps on stairs that should have been empty. 6 months of occasionally seeing the faceless figure standing at the top of the basement stairs, watching, waiting, testing the boundaries Daniel tried to maintain. He kept the iron bolt with him always, slept with it under his pillow. The figure never came close when he held it, maintained distance, respected the barrier iron created. But Daniel could feel it, watching, patient, knowing that eventually he would sleep too deeply, or forget to carry the bolt, or make some mistake. The basement itself changed. Some mornings it would be normal-sized. Other mornings, Daniel would open the door and see that impossible extension, space stretching away into darkness, pillars marching into infinity. He learned not to enter on those mornings, to simply close the door and wait for the basement to contract, back to normal dimensions. He also learned that things came up from the basement sometimes, not just the faceless figure. Other things, shapes that weren't quite human, sounds that weren't quite language. On bad nights, he Rose Chen was a midwife serving the remote communities around Jellicoe, Tennessee. She'd delivered over 400 babies in her 15-year career, working primarily with families who preferred home births or who lived too far from hospitals to make them practical. Rose drove a modified van equipped with medical supplies, communication equipment, and everything necessary to handle births in isolated mountain homes. In December 2020, Rose got a call from a woman named Sarah Blackwood, first-time mother, 37 weeks along, living in a cabin near the Virginia-Tennessee border. Sarah's voice on the phone was calm but insistent. "My water broke 2 hours ago. Contractions are 12 minutes apart. Can you come?" Rose took the address, plugged it into her GPS, and drove into the mountains. The route took her along increasingly narrow roads, paved giving way to gravel, giving way to dirt. Her GPS lost signal after the first 20 minutes, but Sarah had provided written directions that Rose followed carefully. The cabin appeared after an hour of driving, a small structure nestled in a clearing surrounded by dense forest. Smoke rose from the chimney. Lights glowed in the windows. It looked welcoming, exactly the sort of remote home where Rose did her best work. Sarah answered the door, visibly pregnant, her face showing the concentration of a woman in early labor. "Thank you for coming. I was worried you wouldn't find the place." "Your directions were perfect," Rose said, carrying her equipment inside. "How are you feeling?" "Contractions still regular." "Getting closer." "Maybe 10 minutes apart now." Rose set up in the cabin's bedroom, a small space with a bed, a dresser, and not much else. She examined Sarah, checked vitals, monitored the baby's heartbeat. Everything seemed normal. Sarah was progressing well. The baby's position was good. No signs of complications. "Do you have someone who can be here with you?" Rose asked. "Family? The baby's father?" Sarah's face darkened. "No, it's just me. The father isn't in the picture." Rose had heard that story before. She didn't press. "Okay, we'll do this together. You're doing great." Labor progressed normally for the first 4 hours. Sarah's contractions intensified, moving from 10 minutes apart to 8 to 5. Rose monitored everything carefully, ready to intervene if complications arose, but prepared to let nature handle what nature did well. Then, at hour 5, something changed. Sarah's contractions stopped. Not slowed, not became irregular, but stopped completely. One moment she was breathing through a strong contraction, the next she was relaxed, the tension gone from her body, her face peaceful. "That's unusual," Rose said, checking her watch. "Sometimes labor stalls, but not usually this abruptly. How are you feeling?" "Fine," Sarah said, and she looked fine. Not tired, not in pain, not showing any of the exhaustion that should have come from 5 hours of labor. Rose performed another examination. Sarah's cervix, which had been dilated to 6 centimeters 20 minutes earlier, was now at 5 centimeters. Not stalled, reversing, as if labor was running backwards, undoing the progress it had made. "This isn't normal," Rose said carefully. "I think we need to get you to a hospital. Something's wrong." "No hospitals," Sarah said firmly. "I can't go to a hospital." "Sarah, labor doesn't reverse. Your cervix was more dilated before. That shouldn't be possible. We need medical imaging, more equipment than I have here." "Please," Sarah said, and there was something in her voice that stopped Rose's arguments. "Just wait. Just give it more time. It'll start again." Rose didn't like it, but she couldn't force Sarah to go to a hospital. She stayed, monitoring, watching for any sign that labor would resume. An hour passed. 2. Sarah's contractions didn't return. Her cervix continued to close, slowly reversing until it was back to 3 centimeters, then 2. And the baby's heartbeat began to slow. Not dangerously, not into distress, but measurably slower. As if the baby was becoming less active, less present. "Sarah, I need to know what's happening," Rose said. "This isn't normal labor. This is something else. Talk to me." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You're going to think I'm crazy. Try me. I've seen a lot of strange things in 15 years of delivering babies." Sarah took a shaky breath. "I'm not supposed to have this baby. I tried to go through with it, but it won't let me. Every time I go into labor, every time I get close to delivery, it reverses. Stops, goes backward. I've been pregnant for 53 weeks, Rose. 53 weeks. I've gone into labor 6 times. 6 different midwives, and every time, the baby undoes its own birth." Rose felt cold spread through her chest. "That's not possible. Pregnancy doesn't last that long. The baby would be too developed. You'd be in serious danger." "I know, but look at me. Look at my belly. Does it look like I've been pregnant for over a year? Does the baby seem too big, too developed?" Rose had to admit Sarah was right. For 53 weeks of pregnancy, the baby should have been massive, overdeveloped, possibly not viable. But according to Rose's examination, Sarah was carrying a normal-sized baby, appropriate for 37 or 38 weeks. As if the pregnancy kept resetting, returning to the same stage, refusing to progress beyond a certain point. "Why?" Rose asked. "Why won't the baby be born?" Sarah's face crumpled. "Because it knows what's waiting for it. It knows it's not supposed to exist. The father, She paused, struggling. "He's not alive anymore. He died before I knew I was pregnant, and somehow the baby knows. It knows its father is gone, and it won't enter a world where he doesn't exist." Rose had heard of labor stalling due to stress, anxiety, fear. The mind could definitely affect the body's ability to progress through birth. But this was something different. This was regression, reversal, a baby actively undoing its own arrival. "Sarah, grief can affect labor, but not like this. What you're describing is impossible." "Then explain what you're seeing. Explain my cervix closing. Explain why I've been pregnant for over a year. Explain why 6 different midwives have all witnessed the same thing and fled because they couldn't rationalize it." Rose couldn't explain it. She checked Sarah's vitals again, monitored the baby's heartbeat. Both were stable, normal, but the heartbeat continued to slow, fading, as if the baby was retreating deeper into the womb, withdrawing from the approach of birth. "What do you want me to do?" Rose asked finally. Help me. Help me convince the baby it's okay to be born, that the world isn't as horrible as it thinks, that it can survive without its father. Rose wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Talk to an unborn baby. Convince it to be born. That wasn't medicine. That was magical thinking. But Rose was standing in a cabin in the mountains watching labor run backwards, witnessing something that violated every principle of obstetrics she'd learned. Maybe absurdity was the only appropriate response. "Okay," Rose said. "I'll try. But Sarah, if this doesn't work, if the baby keeps regressing, I'm calling for emergency transport. I don't care if you don't want a hospital. This situation is beyond my ability to manage." Sarah nodded, relief flooding her face. "Thank you." Rose positioned herself near Sarah's belly, feeling ridiculous but committed. She spoke to the baby, her voice soft but clear. "Hey there, little one. I know you're scared. I know coming into the world seems dangerous. But your mom is here. She loves you. She wants to meet you. And yes, your father isn't here, but that doesn't mean you won't be loved. Sarah has been carrying you for a long time, waiting for you, refusing to give up. That's how much she wants you." Nothing happened. The baby's heartbeat remained slow and distant. Sarah's cervix stayed at 2 centimeters. Rose tried again, speaking with more urgency. "You can't stay in there forever. At some point you have to come out. You have to live. Existence is hard, but it's also beautiful. There are people waiting to love you. Experiences waiting for you. You deserve to be born. You deserve to live." The baby's heartbeat stuttered. Rose felt it through her stethoscope, a rhythm that caught, paused, then resumed slightly faster. Responding. The baby was responding to her words. "That's it," Rose encouraged. "You can do this. Your mother can do this. Together, you can handle whatever comes. Birth is scary, but you're strong enough. I promise you're strong enough." Sarah gasped. "I felt something. A contraction. It's starting again." Rose checked. Sarah's cervix was dilating again, 3 centimeters, slowly opening. The baby's heartbeat was accelerating, becoming stronger, more present. Labor was resuming, moving forward this time, progressing normally. But Rose felt something else. A presence in the room that hadn't been there before. The air grew colder. Shadows in the corners deepened, became solid, took shape, and Rose heard breathing that wasn't Sarah's, wasn't hers, wasn't the baby's. Deep, slow breathing, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Sarah, who else is here?" Rose asked, her voice steady despite her rising fear. "His father," Sarah whispered. "Marcus. He comes sometimes. I think he's been preventing the birth. I think he's trying to keep the baby with him in whatever place he exists now." Rose turned slowly, scanning the room. The shadows had coalesced into a shape, humanoid but indistinct, standing near the door. Watching. The presence radiated grief and possessiveness. A father who couldn't accept that his child would be born into a world where he no longer existed. "Marcus," Rose said, addressing the shadow, "I don't know if you can hear me, but you need to let go. You need to let Sarah deliver this baby. Keeping it from being born isn't protecting it. It's hurting both of them. Your child deserves to live, even if you can't be here physically." The shadow moved, flowed closer. The temperature dropped further. Rose's breath misted in the suddenly frigid air. Sarah whimpered, her contraction intensifying, her body trying to push the baby forward while something else pulled it back. "Marcus, please," Sarah begged. "Please let our baby be born. I know you're scared. I know you don't want to miss this, but you're hurting us. You're trapping our child in a space between existence and non-existence. That's not love. That's not protecting. That's just fear." The shadow stopped moving. The presence in the room shifted, became less oppressive, less possessive. Rose felt the change, a release of tension, a letting go. The breathing stopped. The shadows retreated to normal corners, became ordinary darkness again, and Sarah screamed. A full contraction, powerful and progressive, her body finally free to do what it needed to do. Her cervix dilated rapidly, 5 centimeters, 7, 9. The baby's heartbeat was strong now, steady, eager. After 53 weeks of resistance, labor was finally progressing normally. Rose worked quickly, guiding Sarah through contractions, monitoring the baby's position, preparing for delivery. 2 hours later, at 3:47 a.m., Sarah delivered a healthy baby girl. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Normal in every way. She came out crying, lungs strong, color good, perfectly formed. Rose placed the baby on Sarah's chest. Mother and daughter looked at each other, and Sarah started crying, great heaving sobs of relief and joy and exhaustion. "She's here," Sarah whispered. "She's finally here." Rose completed the delivery, checked Sarah for complications, monitored the baby's vital signs. Everything was normal. Perfect even, as if the previous 53 weeks of impossible pregnancy had never happened. But when Rose cleaned up and packed her equipment, she noticed something on the bedroom wall. Marks that hadn't been there earlier. Handprints, large, adult-sized, pressed into the wall at odd angles. Too many handprints, overlapping, as if someone had been pacing the room all night, touching the walls repeatedly, leaving evidence of their presence. "Marcus?" Rose asked quietly. Sarah nodded. "He's been here the whole time. Watching. I think he finally understands that holding on was hurting her. I think he let go." Rose didn't know what to say. She didn't believe in ghosts, in spirits, in the supernatural, but she'd witnessed something tonight that violated everything she understood about pregnancy and birth. Maybe beliefs didn't matter. Maybe reality was stranger than any system of beliefs could account for. She stayed until morning, making sure Sarah and the baby were stable. When the sun rose, Rose loaded her equipment into her van and prepared to leave. Sarah walked her to the door, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Thank you," Sarah said. "Thank you for not running. Thank you for staying." "What will you name her?" Rose asked. "Marcia, after her father. So he's always part of her name, even if he can't be here." Rose drove away from the cabin, following the dirt roads back to civilization. The drive should have taken an hour, but Rose made it back to Jellicoe in 20 minutes, the distance somehow shorter in daylight, as if space had contracted, or the location had existed further from reality than geography suggested. Rose reported the birth to her agency, logged it as a successful home delivery, documented the mother and baby's health. She didn't mention the 53-week pregnancy. Didn't mention labor running backwards. Didn't mention the presence in the room that had held a baby captive between existence and non-existence for over a year. Who would believe her? Rose barely believed it herself. She tried to follow up with Sarah a week later, called the number Sarah had used to contact her. The number was disconnected. Rose drove back to the location where the cabin should have been, using her van's GPS history to retrace her route. The cabin was gone. The clearing was there, but no structure occupied it. No foundation, no chimney, no evidence that a building had ever stood there. Rose walked the clearing looking for signs of recent habitation and found nothing. She checked county records. No property registered to Sarah Blackwood. No birth certificate filed for a baby girl named Marcia, born on December 17, 2020, in Jellicoe or surrounding counties. No evidence that the birth had happened, that Sarah existed, that Rose had spent 12 hours delivering a baby that had been pregnant for over a year. But Rose had her notes, her documentation, the medical records she'd logged. They were real, detailed, proof that something had happened even if she couldn't prove where or to whom. Rose continued her work as a midwife, delivering babies in remote mountain communities, But she never got another call from Sarah Blackwood. Never saw the cabin again. Never found evidence that Marcia existed in the world of birth certificates and social security numbers and official documentation. Sometimes, late at night, Rose wonders if she helped deliver a ghost's child. A baby that existed in the spaces between life and death, born to a mother who may not have been entirely alive, fathered by a man who definitely wasn't. A child caught between worlds, finally allowed to cross into existence when her father let go of his fear. Or maybe the baby was real, and Sarah took her somewhere far away, somewhere off the grid, where a child born under impossible circumstances could grow up without questions, without scrutiny, without anyone wondering why she existed when she shouldn't. Rose doesn't know, will never know. But she keeps the documentation of that night locked in a file cabinet in her home office. Evidence of a birth that officially never happened, of a baby that wasn't born, but somehow exists anyway. Somewhere in the Appalachian mountains, Rose believes a girl named Marcia is growing up, learning to walk, learning to talk, living a life she fought for 53 weeks to avoid, finally accepting existence, finally willing to be real. And somewhere, in whatever place exists beyond life, a father watches his daughter grow, no longer holding her back, no longer trapping her between worlds, just watching and loving and letting go. Emma Dawson was 15 years old when her mother disappeared in March 2017. They lived in a small town called Piketon, nestled in the Appalachian foothills of Kentucky, population barely breaking 800. Everyone knew everyone, which meant when Claire Dawson vanished on her way home from her nursing shift at the county hospital, the entire community mobilized within hours. Search parties combed the woods. The state police investigated. Divers checked the river. Dogs tracked her scent to a point on Highway 23 and lost it, as if Claire had simply evaporated mid-step. No body, no evidence of foul play, no clues at all. She'd gotten in her car at the hospital parking lot. Her co-worker confirmed it, and somewhere in the 12 miles between the hospital and home, Claire Dawson had ceased to exist. The case went cold within 3 months. Emma and her father, Richard, tried to move on, tried to build a life around the absence, the not knowing. Emma went to school, graduated high school, applied to colleges. She got accepted to the University of Kentucky, moved to Lexington in fall 2021, started a new chapter. That's when Claire came back. Emma got the call on a Tuesday afternoon. Her father, his voice shaking, saying, "Your mother's here. She's home. She just walked through the front door like she never left." Emma drove the 3 hours back to Piketon in a daze, her mind refusing to process what her father had said. 4.5 years missing, and Claire had just walked in. No explanation, no warning. The house looked the same. The front yard with its struggling garden, the porch swing that creaked. The door that always stuck in humid weather. Emma pushed it open and stopped. Her mother sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee from her favorite mug, wearing scrubs that looked new despite being identical to the ones she'd worn the night she vanished. Claire looked up and smiled, her face exactly as Emma remembered it. Not aged, not worn by years of whatever had happened to her, exactly the same. "Hey, sweetheart," Claire said. "How's school?" Emma felt her legs go weak. She sat down heavily in a chair, staring at her mother, searching for signs that this was wrong, that this person was an imposter. But every detail matched. The small scar on Claire's left hand from a kitchen accident years ago, the way she held her coffee mug with both hands, the slight overbite she'd always been self-conscious about. "Mom?" Emma's voice cracked. "Where have you been? What happened to you?" Claire's smile faltered. She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I just got home from my shift. Late one, I'm exhausted." She checked her watch. "It's only 11:30. Why are you here? Don't you have classes tomorrow?" Emma looked at her father. Richard stood in the doorway, his face pale, his expression somewhere between joy and horror. "Claire," he said softly, "what day do you think it is?" "March 15th. Wednesday. Why?" "What year?" Claire laughed, but the sound was uncertain. 2017, obviously. "Richard, why are you asking me these questions? Did something happen?" Emma felt cold spread through her chest. Her mother thought it was still 2017. Thought only hours had passed since she'd left for work. Had no awareness that 4.5 years had vanished from her life. "Mom," Emma said carefully, "it's not 2017. It's October 2021. You disappeared in March 2017. You've been missing for over 4 years." Claire's face went blank. She set down her coffee mug with careful precision, as if afraid she might drop it. "That's not funny, Emma. Why would you say something like that?" "It's true," Richard said. He grabbed a newspaper from the counter, the Piketon Weekly dated October 12th, 2021, and put it in front of Claire. "You vanished. We searched for you. The police investigated. You were gone, Claire, and now you're back, and you don't remember any of it." Claire read the newspaper date. Read it again. Her hands started shaking. She stood up quickly, looked around the kitchen, and Emma saw her mother notice the changes. Small things, updates they'd made over the years, a new refrigerator, different curtains. A calendar on the wall showing 2021. "No," Claire whispered. "No, that's not possible. I just drove home. It was a 30-minute drive. I listened to the radio. I stopped for gas at the Shell station. I came straight here." "What did you hear on the radio?" Emma asked. Claire struggled to remember. "Music. Country music, I think. And news. Something about—" She paused, her face screwing up in concentration. "I can't remember. It was just normal radio." Over the next hours, Richard and Emma tried to piece together what had happened. They called the police, who came quickly, their skepticism obvious, but their duty clear. The two officers who'd worked Claire's original case took statements, verified her identity, confirmed that yes, this was definitely Claire Dawson, definitely the missing woman. And she had somehow returned with no memory of being gone. Medical examination showed nothing unusual. Claire was healthy, showed no signs of malnutrition or abuse or prolonged exposure to elements. Her body hadn't aged. Even her clothes, when forensics examined them, showed no wear beyond a single shift's work. It was as if she'd stepped out of March 2017, spent 30 minutes driving, and arrived in October 2021. The story made regional news. Missing woman returns with no memory of lost years. Psychologists suggested dissociative fugue states. The police investigated whether someone had held Claire captive, kept her in some kind of suspended state. But there was no evidence, no explanations. Just a woman who'd been gone for 4.5 years and experienced only 30 minutes. Emma returned to school after a week, her head spinning. Her mother was back, which should have been wonderful, miraculous, but something felt wrong. Claire was too normal, too exactly the same, like a recording, a copy, a version that had been paused while the world moved on, and there were small discrepancies. Claire claimed she'd stopped for gas at the Shell station on Highway 23, but that station had closed in 2018. She mentioned planning to watch a TV show that had been cancelled before she disappeared. She talked about co-workers who'd retired or moved away, using present tense as if they were still there. Emma started researching. She dug through her mother's missing person case file, which the police had grudgingly given her father. She read witness statements, looked at the map of Claire's last known route, studied the spot where the tracking dogs had lost her scent. That spot was interesting. Mile marker 47 on Highway 23, a stretch of road with nothing remarkable about it. Forest on both sides, no houses, no businesses, no side roads. Dogs had tracked Claire's scent to that exact point and lost it completely, as if she'd been plucked off the pavement by something in the air. Emma drove to mile marker 47 on a Saturday afternoon. She parked her car and walked the road, looking for anything unusual. The pavement was old, cracked, weeds growing through gaps, trees pressed close on both sides, creating a tunnel effect. It looked like 1,000 other stretches of rural highway in Appalachia. But when Emma checked her phone at the mile marker, it showed no signal. She'd had 2 bars 100 yards back, 2 bars 100 yards ahead, but right at marker 47, nothing. Complete dead zone. She walked the area, checking her phone periodically. The dead zone extended about 50 feet, centered on the mile marker. Emma stood in the middle of it and felt something change. The air pressure shifted. Her ears popped. The forest sounds faded, becoming distant and muffled. And for just a second, Emma saw something. The road flickered, doubled, showing 2 versions of the same space. One was the normal highway, the reality she knew. The other was almost the same but subtly different, the pavement in better condition, the forest less overgrown, the mile marker showing a different style of sign. The flicker ended. Normal reality reasserted itself. But Emma understood. Her mother had driven through this spot, this weak point where different versions of the same road overlapped, and somehow Claire had slipped from one to the other. from 2017 to a version of 2017 that continued separately, running parallel to normal time. And now, 4.5 years later in normal time, but only 30 minutes later in the other timeline, Claire had driven back through the weak point and returned. Emma called her father that night and explained her theory. Richard listened quietly, then said, "If that's true, if she really only experienced 30 minutes, then we need to help her adjust. She's lost 4.5 years, Emma. She'll need time to catch up." But that wasn't the problem. The problem revealed itself 3 days later. Emma got another call from her father, his voice panicked. "Your mother's gone again. She drove to work this morning and hasn't come back. It's been 8 hours, Emma. She should have been home by now." Emma drove to Piketon again, fear and frustration warring in her chest. They called the police, organized another search, checked the hospital, Claire's route, every place she might have stopped. And at 11:30 p.m., Claire walked through the front door, looking confused and tired, wearing the same scrubs she'd left in that morning. "Why is everyone still up?" she asked. "It's late. You left 12 hours ago," Richard said. "Where have you been?" Claire checked her watch, confusion on her face. "I left 45 minutes ago. My shift ended at 11 at. I drove straight home." It happened again 2 days later. Claire left at 7 a.m., arrived home at 11:30 p.m., insisting only 45 minutes had passed, and again 3 days after that, and again. A pattern emerged. Whenever Claire drove, time became unstable for her. What felt like minutes to her were hours in the real world. She was slipping, phasing, unable to stay fully synchronized with normal reality. Emma did more research, drove to mile marker 47 repeatedly, trying to understand the mechanics of the weak point. She brought equipment, cameras, thermometers, EMF detectors borrowed from a ghost hunting friend. She documented everything, building evidence that something genuinely impossible was happening on that stretch of road. The cameras showed the flicker Emma had experienced. For brief moments, the footage would show that other version of the road, a parallel space where time ran differently. The thermometer showed temperature drops of 15 degrees at the exact center of the dead zone. EMF readings spiked randomly, with no electromagnetic source visible. Emma published her findings online, hoping someone had experienced something similar. She got responses from 3 people, all in Appalachia, all reporting spots where time seemed to skip or stretch. 2 were on highways. One was in a small town where locals claimed you could enter the grocery store at 2 p.m. and emerge at 6 p.m. while insisting only 10 minutes had passed. But none of them had solutions. No one knew how to fix the problem, how to resynchronize someone who'd become unstuck from normal time. Claire's condition worsened. The time displacements grew longer. A trip to the grocery store that should have taken 30 minutes consumed 6 hours. A drive to visit her sister, a 3-hour round trip, took 2 days. Claire would arrive at her destination insisting she'd been driving for the normal amount of time, confused by everyone's panic and relief. And she started forgetting, at first small things, where she'd put her keys, what she'd had for breakfast. But the forgetting accelerated. She'd lose memories of entire days, would forget conversations she'd had hours earlier. Would ask Emma questions she'd asked yesterday, last week, multiple times. Emma realized what was happening. Her mother was becoming unstuck not just from normal time, but from continuous existence. Each time Claire slipped into that parallel timeline, she was losing synchronization with herself, creating gaps in her memory, her identity fragmenting across multiple timelines. "We need to stop you from driving," Emma told her mother during a good day when Claire seemed present and aware. "Every time you drive, especially on Highway 23, you slip. You lose time. You're not safe." Claire's face crumpled. "I can't just stay here. I have work. I have responsibilities. I can't be a prisoner in my own house." You're not a prisoner. We're trying to protect you. From what? From living my life? Claire stood up, agitated. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to lose 4 years. I didn't ask to come back wrong. But I'm here, I'm real, and I need to keep living. If that means sometimes time gets confused, then fine, I'll deal with it. She left the house that day, drove into town, and didn't come back for 3 days. When she finally walked through the door, Claire didn't remember leaving, didn't remember the argument, didn't remember Emma at all. Who are you? Claire asked, looking at Emma with polite confusion. Are you Richard's niece? Emma's world broke. Her mother was gone again, not physically this time, but mentally. The person standing in front of her wore her mother's face, had her mother's voice, but the memories were wrong, partial, corrupted by too many trips through the weak point, too much time spent between timelines. Over the next month, Claire fragmented further. Some days she knew Emma, some days she didn't. Some days she thought it was still 2017, still the night she'd first vanished. She'd get angry when people told her otherwise, insist they were lying, accuse Richard of playing cruel jokes. Emma hired specialists, neurologists, psychologists, even physicists she contacted through university connections. No one could help. The medical scans showed nothing wrong. Claire's brain was healthy, functioning normally, but her mind was splintering, unable to maintain coherent continuity across the timelines she kept slipping through. In December 2021, 9 weeks after Claire's return, Richard called Emma late at night. Your mother's gone, he said, not driving this time. She just faded. I was sitting with her, holding her hand, and she became transparent. I could see through her. Then she was gone. Gone where? I don't know, but before she disappeared, she looked at me and said, I need to go back. I don't belong here anymore. Time is too heavy in this place. Emma drove to Piketon immediately, arriving to find her father sitting alone in their living room, staring at the space where Claire had been. She flickered, Richard said, like an old TV losing signal. And then there was nothing. Emma spent days at mile marker 47, waiting, watching, hoping her mother would reappear. The weak point was still there, still showing those brief flickers of the other timeline. But Claire didn't emerge. It's been 3 years now. Emma graduated from UK, got a job in Lexington, tried to build a normal life, but she drives to mile marker 47 once a month, parks her car, and watches the road, watching for flickers, watching for any sign of her mother. She's seen people sometimes, in the flickers, other drivers, other travelers, moving through that parallel timeline. They look solid, real, going about their lives in a version of reality that runs just slightly different from this one. Emma wonders if her mother is among them, living in that other 2017, experiencing time normally, in a timeline that doesn't match up with this one. So maybe Claire is happier there? Maybe that's where she was supposed to be all along, and her brief return was the real anomaly, a glitch that the universe corrected by pulling her back. Emma wants to believe that, wants to think her mother is somewhere, alive and whole and not fragmenting. But late at night, when sleep won't come, Emma wonders if Claire is stuck between timelines, flickering back and forth, experiencing moments in multiple realities but belonging to none of them. The police closed the case, listed Claire as missing again, though they can't explain how someone who was confirmed alive and healthy just vanished from a locked house. The media lost interest. The town stopped talking about it. But Emma knows the truth. Her mother came back wrong, unstuck from time, and no one knew how to fix it. And now, Claire Dawson exists somewhere in the spaces between moments, between timelines, between the versions of reality that overlap in the Appalachian mountains where time doesn't always run straight. Emma still has her mother's coffee mug, the one Claire was drinking from that first day. She keeps it on her desk at work, a reminder. And sometimes, When Emma picks it up, it's warm, as if someone just put it down, as if her mother is still out there, living in some parallel moment, still drinking coffee, still coming home from shifts, still believing it's March 2017 and everything is normal. The coffee is always fresh, always exactly how Claire took it. 2 sugars, no cream. Emma has never made coffee that way in her life. Sarah Mitchell bought the old farmhouse in Comer's Rock, Virginia, in March 2021, paying cash from her inheritance for a place that needed more work than it was probably worth. She was a freelance graphic designer who could work from anywhere, and the pandemic had taught her that anywhere didn't have to be a cramped apartment in Richmond. The house sat on 12 acres of mountain land, with views that made her chest ache and silence so profound it felt holy. The realtor had warned her about the phone situation. No cell service, spotty internet that required a satellite dish, but there was a landline already installed. Old copper lines, the realtor explained. More reliable up here than anything else. The previous owners kept it active. Sarah didn't care. She needed a break from constant connectivity, from notifications and updates and the endless digital noise of modern life. The phone was a beige rotary model mounted on the kitchen wall, probably original to the house's construction in 1967. Sarah found its presence charming, nostalgic, even though she couldn't remember the last time she'd dialed a rotary phone. The number was on a card taped to the wall, along with numbers for the power company, the propane service, and something labeled Party Line Protocol. Sarah assumed the party line reference was outdated, a relic from when multiple households shared a single phone line to save on costs. That hadn't been common since the 1970s or 80s. She filed the information away and didn't think about it again until the phone rang for the first time, 3 days after she'd moved in. It was 11:47 p.m. Sarah had been reading in bed when the sound cut through the silence, old-fashioned and jarring, that mechanical bell that digital phones could never quite replicate. She almost didn't answer, but some ingrained politeness made her pad downstairs in her socks and pick up the heavy receiver. "Hello?" Her voice sounded strange in the dark kitchen. For several seconds, nothing, then breathing, slow and steady, but somehow wrong, too measured, too deliberate. Sarah was about to hang up when a voice spoke, female, distant, as if calling from very far away. "Is this the Mitchell residence?" The accent was Appalachian, but old-fashioned, the kind Sarah had only heard in recordings or movies set decades in the past. "Yes, this is Sarah Mitchell. Who's calling, please?" Another pause, longer this time. The breathing continued beneath the silence. And now Sarah could hear other sounds, faint and strange. Voices, multiple people talking at once, but too distant to make out words. Music, maybe, something that sounded like old radio programming. "I'm sorry for the confusion," the woman's voice said. "I was trying to reach the Hendersons. I must have gotten my signals crossed." "No problem," Sarah said, though something about the conversation felt off. "Wrong number, it happens." "What year is it?" the woman asked. Sarah laughed, thinking it was a joke. 2021, why?" The breathing stopped. All the background sounds cut off simultaneously, leaving only a hollow emptiness on the line. Then, very quietly, the woman spoke again. No, that's not right. That can't be right." The line went dead. Sarah stood in her dark kitchen, the phone receiver heavy in her hand, her heart beating faster than it should. She hung up, told herself it had been a confused elderly person, maybe someone calling from a nursing home, disoriented and lost. It happened. It didn't mean anything. The phone rang again the next night at the same time, 11:47 p.m. Sarah picked up, and this time she heard multiple voices, overlapping, all speaking at once. She could pick out fragments of different conversations, all happening simultaneously on the line. "Price of feed has gone up something terrible." Saw him at the church social, bold as brass. Doctor says it's her heart, says she won't last the winter. Hello? Sarah tried to interject. Hello, there's someone already on the line. The voices continued, paying her no attention, until one by one they fell silent. Then a man's voice, deep and authoritative, spoke directly to her. You shouldn't be on this line. This is a private conversation. I live here, Sarah said, indignation overriding her confusion. This is my phone. Ma'am, I don't know who you are, but this is a party line, and we have rules about eavesdropping. If you're not part of this community, you need to disconnect. What community? What are you talking about? This is my house, my phone line. The man's voice changed, became uncertain. What house? What address? Sarah gave him her address, the rural route number, the description of the property. She heard murmuring in the background, multiple voices conferring. There's no house at that address, the man said finally. That's the old Miller property. Nothing but an empty lot and a burned foundation. Has been since the fire in '73. Sarah's mouth went dry. I'm standing in the house right now. I bought it 2 weeks ago. It's a white farmhouse, built in 1967. Miss, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but we don't appreciate pranks on the line. This is a community service, and we take it seriously. He paused. What year do you think this is? 2021. It's 2021. The silence that followed was so complete, so absolute, that Sarah thought they'd hung up. Then the woman's voice from the previous night spoke, and Sarah could hear the fear in it. Harold, she's the one I told you about, the one who answered last night. She said 2021 then too. That's impossible, the man, Harold, said. But he didn't sound certain anymore. The line doesn't what? Sarah demanded. What is this? What's happening? Ma'am, I need you to listen carefully. Harold's voice had changed again, becoming urgent. Whatever this is, whatever's happening, you need to stop answering this phone. You're not supposed to be able to hear us. We're not supposed to be able to hear you. Why? I don't understand. This is a party line, but it's not a normal line. It hasn't been normal since the accident at the exchange in 1974. The operator, she was killed when lightning struck the building. After that, things got strange. Calls that shouldn't connect, voices from places that don't exist, time getting confused. Sarah felt cold spread through her chest. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you're really in 2021 and we're here in 1974, then something has gone very wrong with the line, and every time we cross, every time we talk, it makes it worse. The woman's voice again, frightened now. Harold, let's just hang up. Let's pretend this didn't happen. Wait, Sarah said quickly. Just tell me, what happens if I keep answering? What makes it worse? Harold was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with reluctance. The line wants to balance itself. If someone from your time keeps connecting to our time, eventually the line will try to fix the paradox. It'll try to put you where you belong, in our time, in 1974. That's insane. Maybe so, but I've been on this party line for 6 years, and I've heard things that shouldn't be possible, talked to people who shouldn't exist. The line has rules, even if we don't understand them. The most important rule is, don't talk across time. Don't make connections that shouldn't exist. Sarah wanted to argue, to rationalize, but a deep instinct told her Harold was telling the truth, or at least what he believed to be true. How do I stop this? Stop answering the phone after 11:30 p.m. That's when the line opens to other times. During the day, it's normal. But at night, especially near midnight, the connections get strange. Just don't answer, no matter what you hear. The line crackled with interference. The woman's voice cut in, panicked. Harold, it's happening again. I can feel it. We need to go, Harold said urgently. Remember what I told you. Don't answer, don't listen, and whatever you do, don't try to... The line went dead with a sound like tearing paper, a rip in reality itself. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the beige phone on the wall, watching the minutes crawl past midnight. The phone didn't ring. But the next night, at 11:47 p.m., it did. Sarah sat in her living room, 30 feet from the kitchen, her hands pressed over her ears, trying to block out the sound. The ringing went on and on, 20 times, 30, not stopping like normal phones did. And beneath the ringing, she could hear voices, faint but growing louder, dozens of them, all calling her name. She lasted until the 43rd ring before her nerve broke. She unplugged the phone from the wall jack, yanking the cord so hard it left a mark on the baseboard. The ringing stopped, the voices cut off. Silence filled the house again. Sarah thought that would be the end of it. She was wrong. The next morning, the phone was plugged back in, the cord neatly coiled, though Sarah had left it in a tangled heap. She stared at it for a full minute before unplugging it again. This time taking the plug downstairs to her basement workshop and locking it in a toolbox. That night, at 11:47 p.m., the phone rang anyway. No cord connecting it to the wall, no power source, but that mechanical bell rang clear and loud in her kitchen. Sarah stood in her bedroom doorway, watching from a distance as the phone rang and rang, the disconnected cord hanging loose against the wall. She didn't answer. She held her ground, and eventually, after what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes, the ringing stopped. The pattern continued for 3 more nights. Disconnected phone ringing at exactly 11:47 p.m., voices calling her name, Sarah refusing to answer. On the 4th night, something changed. At 11:47 p.m., her kitchen was silent. No ringing, no voices. Sarah felt a moment of relief, thinking maybe her refusal had broken whatever connection existed. Then she heard it. Downstairs, in her basement, a phone was ringing, but she didn't have a phone in the basement. She'd never installed one down there. Sarah grabbed a flashlight and a hammer, the only thing resembling a weapon she could find quickly, and went downstairs. The ringing grew louder as she descended, and when she reached the bottom of the stairs and shone her light around, she saw it. In the far corner of the basement, mounted on the wall in a space that had been empty that morning, was another phone. Older than the one in her kitchen, black and rotary, the kind from the 1950s or 60s. The cord disappeared into the wall, into wiring that shouldn't exist. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. Sarah approached slowly, her hand shaking as she reached out. Part of her knew she shouldn't answer, that Harold had warned her, that every connection made things worse, but another part, the part that needed to understand, that couldn't live with the unknown, made her pick up the receiver. "Hello?" The voice that answered wasn't Harold or the woman. It wasn't any voice that should come from a human throat. It spoke in layers, dozens of voices at once, all speaking in unison, creating harmonies that hurt to hear. "We've been trying to reach you about your line. You have a connection that needs to be corrected. You've been assigned to the wrong time. We'd like to help you fix that. Who are you? We're the operators. We maintain the line. We keep the connections clean. But your connection is dirty. It's bleeding across decades. It's making noise in the system. We need to put you back where you belong. I belong here, in 2021, in my house. The house at this location is in 1974, the Miller property. You're in the wrong place. The line knows this. It wants to correct you." Sarah's hand tightened on the receiver. "What does that mean? Correct me." "At midnight, the line will open completely. The connection will be stable. You'll be able to step through. We recommend you pack light. Material objects don't transfer well, but consciousness, memory, the essential self, those cross easily. You want me to go back to 1974? We want to put you where you're supposed to be, where the line says you belong, You've been talking to people from that time. You've been making connections. The line interprets that as a request for transfer. I don't want that. I'm staying here. The layered voice didn't change tone, but something about it became harder, more insistent. You don't have a choice. You answered. You engaged. You created a persistent connection. At midnight, the transfer will occur automatically. We're calling as a courtesy to help you prepare. Sarah slammed the phone down. The receiver cracked, plastic splitting, but the phone immediately rang again. She grabbed the whole unit and yanked it from the wall, tearing out chunks of plaster, pulling wires that sparked and snapped. The ringing continued, emanating from the broken phone in her hands, impossible but undeniable. Sarah ran upstairs, threw the basement phone into her kitchen sink, and turned on the water, trying to short it out, destroy it, anything to make it stop. The phone rang underwater, the sound muffled but persistent. She looked at the clock on her stove. 11:53 p.m. 7 minutes until midnight. Sarah made a decision. She grabbed her car keys, threw on shoes, and ran for her front door. She'd drive away, get off the property, break whatever connection existed between her and this house and that impossible phone line. Her hand was on the doorknob when she heard it. Not from one phone, but from dozens. The ringing was coming from everywhere, from walls and floors and ceilings, as if her entire house had become one giant telephone, all of it ringing in unison, calling her back, demanding she answer. Sarah opened the door and froze. On her porch, sitting as if it had always been there, was another phone. Old, rotary, black, connected to nothing but ringing nonetheless. She looked toward her car, parked 30 yards away in the gravel drive. On her car's hood, another phone, ringing. On the fence post at the edge of her property, another. Hanging from a tree branch, another. Everywhere she looked, phones were appearing, materializing, all ringing in perfect synchronization, all calling her back to answer, to accept the connection, to let the line correct its mistake. The clock in her hallway chimed midnight. All the ringing stopped at once. In the silence that followed, Sarah heard a voice, not from any phone, but from all around her, from the air itself, from reality speaking directly into her mind. Transfer complete. Welcome to 1974. The world lurched. Sarah's vision doubled, trebled, showing her house, but also not her house. The interior familiar but different. Wallpaper patterns changed. Furniture she didn't own. Styles from decades past. She could see both times at once, 2021 and 1974, occupying the same space, overlapping, and she was caught between them, existing in both but belonging to neither. She tried to scream, but her voice came out in two pitches at once, two different timelines trying to produce the same sound. Then, like a radio finding a station, reality locked in. The double vision resolved. Sarah stood in her house, but it wasn't her house anymore. The wallpaper was different, the furniture was different. The rotary phone on the kitchen wall was there, but it was now the only phone, the natural phone, the one that belonged. Outside her window, she could see her car, but it looked wrong, too modern, an anachronism that didn't fit. As she watched, it began to fade, becoming transparent, then disappearing entirely as 1974 asserted itself and rejected objects that didn't belong. Sarah looked down at her hands. She was still here, still solid, still real. But when she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror, she saw herself flickering, phasing in and out of visibility, her body fighting against a timeline that didn't want her. The phone in the kitchen rang. Sarah walked to it slowly, mechanically, and picked up the receiver. "Hello?" Her voice sounded distant, distorted. "Sarah, this is Harold. Did they transfer you?" "I think so. I don't know. I'm in my house, but it's different. Everything's different." "Listen to me carefully." Harold's voice was urgent. "You're not stable yet. You're between times. You have maybe an hour before 1974 decides whether to keep you or reject you. If it rejects you, you won't go back to 2021. You'll go nowhere. You'll become like the operator, stuck in the line itself, existing only in connections, never able to live in any time. How do I stabilize? How do I stay? You need to make a real connection. Talk to someone face to face. Touch something physical. Eat food. Do something that anchors you to this time. The line brought you here, but you have to choose to stay. You have to accept 1974 as real. Where are you? Can you help me? I'm 3 miles down the road. The Henderson place. If you can get here, if you can make it that far, we'll help you. But Sarah, you need to hurry. I can hear it in your voice. You're already fading. Sarah looked down at her hands again. Harold was right. She could see through them now. Her fingers translucent, the kitchen floor visible through her palms. She ran for the door, out into a night that looked almost like her night but subtly different. Stars in wrong positions. The moon a different phase than it should be. Her car was gone completely now. The satellite dish she'd had installed was absent. The fence stiles were different. She started running down the gravel road that led to the main highway, her breath coming in gasps, her body feeling lighter with each step, as if gravity was losing its grip on her. The gravel crunched under her feet, but the sound was faint, distant. Lights ahead. A house. The Henderson place. It had to be. Sarah put everything into a final sprint, her body flickering like a failing light bulb. Lily Anderson inherited her grandmother's house in Mountain City, Tennessee in June 2020. The house was old, built in 1921, and stuffed with decades of accumulated belongings. Lily's grandmother, Martha, had been a collector, a keeper of things, someone who believed every object told a story and deserved preservation. Sorting through the house was overwhelming. Lily took a week off from her job in Nashville and drove up to begin the process of deciding what to keep, what to sell, what to donate. The attic alone contained dozens of boxes, trunks, and crates, all filled with items spanning Martha's 93 years of life. In a trunk labeled Family Photos, Lily found thousands of photographs. Generations of Andersons, documented in black and white, color, Polaroid, digital prints, weddings, birthdays, holidays, random daily moments. Martha had preserved them all, organized chronologically, each decade in its own box. One photograph stood out. It was a black and white image, slightly faded, showing a family standing in front of this very house. A father, mother, 3 children, all dressed in clothes that looked like 1940s or 50s style. They stood in a line, formal and posed, the parents' hands on their children's shoulders. What caught Lily's attention was the house behind them. It looked exactly as it did now, down to specific details. A crack in the front step, a distinctive pattern in the window curtains, a bird's nest visible under the eave. But the house had undergone renovations over the decades. The front step had been replaced in 1987. The windows had been changed in 1995. The eave had been repaired in 2003. Yet this old photograph showed those exact details, anomalies that shouldn't have existed in whatever decade the photo was taken. Lily flipped the photograph over. On the back, written in a pencil, was a date, August 14th, 2020. That was impossible. This was clearly a photograph from the mid-20th century. The clothes, the image quality, the fading, all indicated age. But the date written on the back was 2 months in the future, at the time Lily was looking at it. She was sorting these photos in June. August hadn't happened yet. Lily dismissed it as an error. Someone had dated the photo incorrectly, written 2020 instead of 1920 or 1950. Easy mistake. She set the photograph aside and continued sorting. But over the next days, as Lily cleaned and organized, she kept thinking about that photograph. The family looked familiar somehow, their faces triggering recognition she couldn't place. And the house details bothered her, those modern elements that shouldn't be visible in an old photo. Lily took the photograph to a local historical society, hoping someone could identify the family or provide dating information. The volunteer who examined it was confused. "This paper isn't old," she said, holding the photo up to the light. "This is modern photo paper. The image might be processed to look vintage, but the medium is recent. This was printed in the last few years, maybe the last few months. But it was in my grandmother's trunk, with other old family photos." The volunteer shrugged. "Maybe your grandmother had it printed recently? Restoring an old family photo, copying it to better paper for preservation?" But that didn't explain the date. August 14th, 2020. Written in the same pencil handwriting that appeared on many of the other photos. Martha's distinctive script. Lily returned to the house and examined the photograph more carefully, using a magnifying glass to study the details. The people's faces, the background, the quality of the image. And she noticed something she'd missed before. In one of the house's windows, visible in the background, was a reflection. A figure standing outside the frame of the photograph, watching the family pose. The reflection was blurry but showed enough detail to identify characteristics. The figure was a woman wearing modern clothes, holding what looked like a phone or camera. Lily's stomach dropped. The woman in the reflection looked like her. Same height, same build, same hairstyle Lily currently wore. It was impossible. But the more Lily studied the reflection, the more certain she became. That was her, standing outside the frame of a photograph taken in the 1940s or 50s, watching a family pose in front of her grandmother's house, visible only as a reflection in the window glass. Lily checked the date again. August 14th, 2020, 2 months away. She looked at the house behind the photographic family, looked at the crack in the front step, the window curtains, the bird's nest. Then she went outside and checked the real house. The crack was there. The curtains matched. The bird's nest was visible under the eave, exactly where the photograph showed it. The photograph wasn't old. It was new. It was from the future. It showed a family posing in front of this house on a date that hadn't happened yet, and somehow Lily was there, watching, visible in the reflection. Lily felt reality shift under her feet. She was holding proof of a future event, documentation of something that hadn't occurred but would occur, inevitably, on August 14th. And she would be present, would witness it, would be captured in the reflection, whether she wanted to be or not. She tried to rationalize. Hoax. Someone had created this photograph as a joke. A prank on her grandmother, but Martha had been 93 years old, living alone, with dementia in her final years. Who would prank her, and why? And how would they capture Lily's reflection before Lily had inherited the house, before she'd even known? Marcus Chen had been driving through Appalachia for 11 years, hauling lumber and coal between the small mountain towns that dotted the region like forgotten prayers. He knew every winding road, every hairpin turn, every place where the fog settled thick enough to swallow headlights whole. Route 219 through West Virginia was his bread and butter, a stretch he'd driven so many times he could navigate it in his sleep. That familiarity made what happened in October 2019 so much worse. The run from Elkins to Lewisburg should have taken 3 hours, maybe 4 if he stopped for coffee at the truck stop in Marlinton. Marcus left at 4 a.m., wanting to beat the morning fog that turned the mountain roads treacherous. His CB radio crackled with the usual early morning chatter, truckers checking in, sharing road conditions, warning about speed traps. The cab of his Peterbilt smelled like the pine air freshener dangling from his mirror and the bitter dregs of yesterday's coffee. Around mile marker 87, just past Cranberry Glades, Marcus noticed his GPS acting strange. The blue line representing his route kept flickering, jumping, then reappearing in slightly different positions. He tapped the screen, thinking it was a glitch, but the device seemed fine otherwise. The road stretched ahead of him, winding through dense forest exactly as it always had. He'd driven this section hundreds of times. Nothing looked different. Then he saw the sign. Welcome to Ashwood Hollow, population 340. Marcus felt his stomach drop. There was no Ashwood Hollow on Route 219. He knew every town, every community, every wide spot in the road along this stretch. He'd never seen that sign before, never even heard the name. His GPS showed him still on 219, but now it displayed a town name he didn't recognize, right where nothing but forest should be. The road ahead curved into what looked like a small valley, and as Marcus descended, buildings emerged from the early morning darkness. A gas station with pumps that looked decades old, a diner with a flickering neon sign, a post office, a few houses scattered on either side of the road. Streetlights cast pools of yellow light that seemed too bright, too harsh, making the shadows between them impossibly dark. It was 5:17 a.m. Marcus checked his watch 3 times to be sure. The town was completely silent. No cars moved on the street, no lights shone in any windows. The diner's open sign glowed red, but through the windows, Marcus could see empty booths, a counter with no one behind it, coffee pots sitting on burners that weren't lit. He slowed his truck, torn between stopping to investigate and getting the hell out of whatever this was. His CB radio had gone silent. Not even static, just dead air. His cell phone showed no signal, which wasn't unusual in the mountains, but the complete absence of even searching for service felt wrong. The gas station's price sign showed fuel at $1.39 per gallon. Marcus had seen old signs before, relics from past decades left to rot, but this one's numbers were crisp and clear, recently changed. The fluorescent lights inside the station convenience store were on, illuminating aisles of products he couldn't quite make out through the windows. As his truck rolled slowly through what seemed to be the center of town, Marcus noticed details that made his skin crawl. Every building looked maintained, painted, cared for, but also somehow dated. The cars parked on the street were models from the 1990s, maybe early 2000s, but they sat as if recently driven, not abandoned. A newspaper stand outside the post office displayed papers behind clouded plastic, the visible headline too blurred to read, but clearly present. Then he saw the people. They stood in the spaces between streetlights, just at the edge of where the illumination failed. Marcus couldn't make out details, just silhouettes, human-shaped shadows that didn't move. He counted 5, then 7, then stopped counting because he realized they were everywhere, in every dark space, standing perfectly still, watching his truck pass. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed at him to accelerate, to get through this place as fast as possible, but something made him maintain his slow crawl through town. Some deep, primal part of his brain warned him that showing fear, showing urgency, would be a mistake. The road curved slightly, and Marcus saw the far end of town, where the forest resumed and Route 219 should continue into normal West Virginia mountains. Relief flooded through him. Just another few hundred yards and he'd be through this place, back to familiar territory, able to convince himself this had been some weird detour, some town he'd somehow never noticed before. That's when the figure stepped into the road. It was a man, or something shaped like a man, standing directly in Marcus's lane about 50 yards ahead. Tall, wearing what looked like old-fashioned clothes, a hat that obscured any detail of the face beneath it. The figure didn't move, didn't wave, just stood there as Marcus's truck approached. Marcus hit his horn. The sound shattered the silence, echoing off the buildings, but the figure didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't move. Marcus was doing maybe 15 miles per hour, enough to stop, but as he pressed his brake, the figure raised one arm and pointed directly at him. The temperature in the cab dropped so suddenly that Marcus could see his breath. Every hair on his body stood up. The pointing arm didn't waver, and now Marcus could see that where the man's face should be, there was just shadow, a darkness that seemed to absorb the streetlight rather than merely existing in its absence. Marcus made a decision. He yanked the wheel hard right, mounting the curb, driving his truck onto what passed for a sidewalk to get around the figure. His trailer clipped a street sign, metal screaming against metal, but he didn't care. He had to get out, had to get past. As he swerved around the figure, Marcus made the mistake of looking directly at it. The darkness where its face should be moved, rippled, and for just a second, Marcus saw faces in that darkness. Dozens of them, hundreds, all screaming silently, all reaching out, all trapped in whatever that thing was. Then he was past it, his truck bouncing back onto the road, the last buildings of Ashwood Hollow falling behind him. The forest closed in on both sides. His headlights found normal pavement, normal road signs, the familiar markers of Route 219. His CB radio crackled back to life mid-conversation. Truckers talking about a wreck near Beckley like no time had passed at all. Marcus pulled over at the first wide spot he found, his hands shaking so badly he could barely put the truck in park. His GPS showed his route as an unbroken blue line along 219, no detours, no side roads, no towns where Ashwood Hollow had been. According to the device, he'd been driving straight through without deviation. But his dash cam didn't lie. Marcus pulled up the footage with trembling fingers, watching his truck slow as it approached that sign, that impossible town. He watched himself drive through silent streets past buildings that shouldn't exist. He watched the shadowed figures standing in the darkness. He watched himself swerve around the thing in the road. The footage showed everything exactly as he remembered it, with one addition that made Marcus's blood turn to ice. As he swerved past the figure, just before his truck cleared the town limits, the dash cam captured something his human eyes had missed in his panic. Every one of those shadowed figures had moved. They'd all turned to watch him go, and in that final frame before the forest swallowed the town, they'd all raised their arms in that same pointing gesture. Marcus reported it, called the state police, tried to explain what he'd seen. They were polite but dismissive. No town called Ashwood Hollow existed on Route 219, no such place in any county records. His dash cam footage played back fine for him, but when he tried to show the officers, it showed only empty road, normal forest, nothing unusual. He tried driving that route again 3 weeks later in full daylight, with a friend following in a car behind him. They saw nothing unusual, no sign, no town, just road and trees and mountains like there'd always been. But at mile marker 87, Marcus's GPS flickered and jumped for just a second, and the temperature in his cab dropped enough for him to see his breath. Marcus doesn't drive Route 219 anymore. He takes longer routes, adds hours to his trips, loses money on fuel. He doesn't care. Because sometimes, late at night when he's driving through other parts of Appalachia, he sees them. The figures standing in the shadows between streetlights in real towns, in places that definitely exist. They never move. They just watch. And sometimes, if he looks too long, one of them raises an arm and points at him. He never stops. He never slows down. And he never, ever drives through a town he doesn't recognize. No matter how real it looks, no matter how badly he needs gas or food or rest. Because Marcus knows something now that he wishes he didn't. Ashwood Hollow is still out there, waiting on some version of Route 219 that exists sideways to our reality. And it remembers the truck that got away. Thomas Grady had been a mail carrier for the United States Postal Service for 23 years, serving the rural routes around Grundy, Virginia. His territory covered nearly 200 square miles of mountain country, winding roads that climbed ridges and descended into hollows, connecting communities so small they barely showed up on maps. He knew every box, every driveway, every dog that would bark when his truck passed. Route 7, his primary circuit, could be driven in 6 hours if everything went smoothly, 8 if weather or road conditions slowed him down. On November 3, 2018, Route 7 took him 31 hours to complete. By the time he finished, Thomas was no longer entirely sure what year it was. The day started normally. Thomas loaded his truck at 6 a.m., sorted mail, checked his delivery list. 147 stops, mostly houses scattered along Highway 83 and the county roads that branched from it. Weather was clear, temperature in the mid-40s, perfect for the route. He pulled out of the Grundy post office at 6:43 a.m., right on schedule. The first 20 stops went fine. Thomas worked his way north on Highway 83, turning into driveways, depositing mail in boxes, exchanging waves with the few people he saw out in their yards. Stop 21 was the Pritchard Place, a double-wide trailer about 15 miles out. Stop 22 should have been the Callahan farm, another 3 miles up the road. Thomas never reached the Callahan farm. The road just kept going. At first, he didn't notice. Mountain roads can be deceptive, landmarks harder to spot than you'd think. But after what should have been 5 minutes became 10, then 15, Thomas started paying closer attention. The road stretched ahead of him, winding through forest, climbing and descending, but never reaching the Callahan farm. No mailbox marked with their name. No driveway turning off toward the barn he could usually see from the highway. He checked his odometer. 8 miles since the Pritchard place. The Callahan farm was 3 miles from Pritchard's. He'd driven 5 miles too far, but the road showed no signs of the landmarks he should have passed. No intersection where County Road 14 branched east. No bridge over Stony Creek. No historical marker for the Civil War skirmish site. Thomas pulled over, killed the engine, and pulled out his map, the paper version, the one he'd marked up over 23 years of driving this route. According to the map, he should be well past the Callahan farm, past 3 other delivery stops, almost to where Highway 83 intersected with Route 460. But according to his windshield, he was on an endless stretch of 2-lane mountain highway, forest pressing close on both sides, no intersections, no landmarks, just road. He tried his cell phone. No signal. Not unusual in the mountains, but he should have had at least intermittent service along Highway 83. His GPS unit showed him in the middle of a blank area. No roads displayed, no position markers, just a blue dot on an empty gray screen. Thomas took a breath, told himself not to panic. He'd gotten disoriented somehow, maybe taken a wrong turn without noticing. The mountains could do that to you. He'd backtrack to the Pritchard place and start over. He turned the truck around and headed back the way he'd come. The road unspooled behind him, familiar but somehow wrong. He drove for 10 miles, then 15, then 20. The Pritchard place never appeared. No landmarks emerged. Just endless road, endless forest, endless mountains. The gas gauge caught his attention. He'd started with 3/4 of a tank. Now it showed just under half. He'd burned through a quarter tank driving roads that should have consumed maybe a gallon. The numbers didn't make sense. Thomas pulled over again, this time getting out of the truck. The air smelled right, that mix of pine and damp earth and the faint sweetness of decomposing leaves. Birds called in the forest. The pavement under his feet felt solid and real. Everything was normal except for the impossible fact that he'd been driving the same stretch of road for over an hour without reaching any landmarks in either direction. He walked 20 yards up the road, looking for... What? A seam in reality? A sign that said, You've left the normal world. He didn't know. The road looked like every other mountain highway he'd driven. 2 lanes, faded yellow center line, occasional patches of repair work, trees pressing close, mountains rising on both sides. Then he noticed the mile markers. Highway 83 had mile markers every mile, green signs with white numbers marking the distance from the county line. Thomas had passed mile marker 47 just before the Pritchard place. He'd been watching for mile marker 50, which should be near the Callahan farm. The marker ahead of him read 47. The same marker he'd passed an hour ago. Thomas walked back to his truck and drove forward slowly, watching the mile markers. 47, then a mile later. 47 again, and again, and again. The same marker, repeating, the road recreating itself endlessly, a loop that shouldn't be possible. He drove faster, punching the accelerator, eating up miles, looking for any change, any variation. Mile marker. 47 flashed past 8 times, 12 times, 20 times. The scenery stayed identical. The same curves, the same trees, the same section of road repeating like a skipping record. Thomas stopped counting markers after the 40th repetition. His gas gauge showed a quarter tank. He'd been driving for 3 hours on a road that was supposedly 3 miles long.